What would be the cause of this vast amount of information found in all of life? Information that communicates a message. Welcome to the Ryan Holmes podcast, where our goal is to encourage Christian thinking and Christian living. This is episode 8. Welcome back to another episode this week, and I really hope that you enjoyed last week. We discussed the evidence for the fine-tuning of our universe, and then we directed that towards the existence of God. So if you missed out on that one, please go back and have a listen to last week's episode. This week, we will be somewhat adding another building block, if you will, to the argument for the Christian worldview, and some concepts or ideas will actually kind of carry over into this one, this week. But I'm excited about the topic. We're going to be talking about basically, and I'll be very vague about what the topics are because I want to really just jump in and unpack it and give you all the information. But we're going to be talking about information, and we're going to be talking about complexity. All right. I know it's super vague, doesn't really tell you anything, but we're going to be talking about information and complexity. So I want to start off today by sharing an illustration with you. And you might recall that, or you might notice that this is something that I've used before in a previous episode, but it applies nicely to our topic this week. So I want you to imagine yourself walking along a sandy beach. You come across a message written in the sand, and the message reads, "Billy loves Sally." Immediately after seeing this message written in the sand, your mind begins turning and begins thinking. One thing you might ask yourself is, I wonder who wrote this message. You make an assumption, and I think a correct assumption, that someone must have written this message in the sand. You make this assumption against any concrete observable evidence. You didn't have the chance to watch someone write this message in the sand, and yet you have strong confidence in your belief that someone did. Why would you? Why would you assume that a message such as "Billy loves Sally" would come from a person? Because you would be left with one of two choices. Either this was the work of non-intelligent blind forces, or it would be the product of some sort of intelligence. There are only two types of causes: a non-intelligent cause or an intelligent cause. An intelligent cause would be the most reasonable conclusion for you to draw. Because what do you have within the message "Billy loves Sally"? Information. And not just any information, but you have information arranged in a specific way to communicate a specific message. Ask yourself this question: has there ever been a time when information came from anything other than an intelligent source? I think you'd be hard-pressed to provide any example of information arising from a non-intelligent source. When we find information, we assume intelligence. When we assume intelligence, we find a mind as the source of that intelligence. A rock cannot communicate information. A tree cannot communicate information. Only intelligence can communicate information. Why is this so important to our subject matter today? Well, it's because there is an abundance of information found in life. This information also communicates a message, and it is part of the foundational building blocks of all life on earth. Where is this information found? It's found in DNA. So DNA is a complex molecule that contains all the information necessary to build and maintain an organism. All living organisms have DNA within their cells. In fact, nearly every cell in a multicellular organism possesses the full set of DNA required for that organism. DNA has a helical structure, so it makes it look like a twisted ladder, if you can kind of picture that in your mind. I'm sure you've seen pictures. The sides of the ladder are formed by alternating deoxyribose and phosphate molecules, and the rungs of the ladder consist of a specific order of 4 nitrogen bases. The nitrogen bases are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. These are represented by the letters A, T, C, and G. To put this into perspective, I want us to consider the single-cell amoeba. The information found in just the nucleus of the amoeba is more than all 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica combined. The information found in the entire amoeba is as much as 1,000 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So if you spelled out all the A, T, C, and G in the single cell amoeba, the letters would fill 1,000 complete sets of an encyclopedia. And our bodies contain, from what I know, billions or trillions of cells, like a crazy number of cells. Obviously, that is a lot of information. Not only is this a lot of information, but this information is arranged in a specific way that communicates a particular message. You see, the letters A, T, C, and G comprise what is known as the genetic alphabet, and it's actually identical to our English alphabet based on how it can communicate a message. The only difference would be that this is a 4-letter alphabet instead of a 26-letter alphabet. Just as the specific order of letters taken from our 26-letter alphabet arranged can communicate a message, the specific order of A, T, C, and G within a living cell communicates what that living organism will be and how it will function. It's almost like a genetic blueprint for life. It would be similar to digital coding. Now, I'm no expert on this subject, but from what I understand, information is input into a system, and that determines what that type of system or technology will do and how it will function. The technology needs information or coding embedded into it in order to be something useful. Without this information, you might have something that looks cool, but it wouldn't perform any type of useful function. So not only is the information found in DNA complex, but it communicates a specific message. So why is this so important? Well, what would be the cause behind or the source of all this information found in life? We open with the illustration where you imagined yourself walking along the beach and you see a message written in the sand, and the message reads, "Billy loves Sally." You would be right in assuming that there was an intelligent cause behind the message written in the sand. So why would we assume that a message such as "Billy loves Sally" would require an intelligent cause, but a message 1,000 complete sets of an encyclopedia long wouldn't require an intelligent cause? We'll come back to this in just a few minutes. There's one thing that we're going to move on to next that we haven't mentioned to this point, but it's something that automatically gets hitched to this discussion of information found in DNA. Before we continue, I really appreciate you tuning into this episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you please give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and or subscribe on whatever listening platform you might be using, and that'll just help boost its reach and visibility and just get out to more people. If you wish to financially support the podcast and the work that I'm doing, please visit ryanholmespodcast.locals.com. Not only will you be supporting the podcast, but with Locals, you are actually joining a community of like-minded believers that have similar interests to you. You'll receive early access to each episode each week, along with other perks that are exclusive to our Locals community members, and you can subscribe for just $5 a month. If you're on YouTube, please like the video, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Thanks again. I appreciate all of your support. All right, let's get back to it. The discussion of the genetic coding found in life reveals not only the specified complexity of the information found in all living organisms, but it also reveals just how complex life is. We've talked about the information found in the cell, but the DNA molecule is only a part of the whole cell. The cell is a molecular machine. The dynamic systems working together within the cell are also irreducibly complex, meaning that mostly every part of the functioning cell has to be in place and intact at the same time. This points to a greater and more important discussion. The common perspective on how life arose is that life began in some sort of primordial soup where something like this single cell came together. We are led to believe that life began in this simple form and this simple setting. But the single cell is absolutely anything but simple. Life in its micro scale is irreducibly complex. The complexity of the cell is astonishing. If a system were irreducibly complex, then if there were any part of that system missing or not functioning properly, the entire system could break down. Let me just provide a small example, a small but very profound example of what I'm talking about. Michael Behe, in his book Darwin's Black Box, speaks of a little girl, just 2 years old, that suffers from a rare disease called eye cell disease. The excerpt from the book says this, all right? So bear with me, it's a long portion, but I think it's really important to illustrating the point. It says this: "She is only 2 feet tall. Her face and eyes are puffed up and her legs are bent. She moves stiffly. A medical examination shows an enlarged heart, liver, and spleen. A cough and runny nose bespeak another of the many upper respiratory infections she has endured in her young life. The doctor takes a tissue sample from the girl and sends it to a lab for analysis. A lab worker grows cells from the sample in a petri dish and examines them under a microscope. Each of the cells contain thousands of little dense grains that aren't present in normal cells. The grains are called inclusion bodies. Because the disease is progressive, the skeletal and neural difficulties will increase with time. The girl will die before the age of 5. Eye cell disease is caused by a defect in the protein transport pathway. The cells of patients with the disease lack one of the machines in the long chain that takes proteins from the cytoplasm to the lysosome. Because of the defect, enzymes intended for the lysosome never make it there. Instead, they are shunted off in the wrong vesicle to the cell membrane and dumped into the extracellular space. The cell is a dynamic system, and just as it must build new structures, it must continually degrade old ones. Old material is brought to the lysosome for degradation. In children with eye cell disease, the garbage is dumped into the disposal as it should be, but the disposal is broken. None of the degradative enzymes that normally decompose old structures are present. As a result, garbage piles up and lysosomes get filled. The cell makes new lysosomes to accommodate the increasing waste. A single flaw in the cell's labyrinthine protein transport pathway is fatal. Unless the entire system were immediately in place, our ancestors would have suffered a similar fate. Attempts at a gradual evolution of the protein transport system are a recipe for extinction. This is just one example of the vast amount of molecular machines that are irreducibly complex. Every part needs to be in place, otherwise issues and potential death can arise. So we've talked some about the information found in life, how it is both complex and specified, and this led to the default conclusion that life is also vastly complex, even at its quote-unquote simplest form. These are two big topics when it comes to the origin of life, or first life. If life arose spontaneously from non living materials and came together by unguided evolutionary processes, how can the complexity in the first and simplest forms of life be explained? Also, where did this information come from that is infused in every single living organism that is foundational to life itself? Remember that there are only two types of causes: intelligent causes or non intelligent causes. Two contrasting landmarks, such as the Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore, are two examples of the difference between a non intelligent and intelligent cause. The Grand Canyon was formed by the process of erosion, so non intelligent causes, and Mount Rushmore was formed by the careful crafting and molding to look like the faces of the four presidents. So this is an intelligent cause. Biochemist Klaus Dosa remarked that after 30 plus years of research, his research led to, quote, a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than its solution. At present, all discussions on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance. Molecular biologist Francis Crick had this to say: every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I swear I will never write another one, because there is too much speculation running after too few facts. The lack of evidence and understanding of how life originated is so telling that some prominent evolutionists have even suggested that our life here on Earth originated from extraterrestrial life. Fred Hoyle invented this theory called panspermia, meaning seeds everywhere. The theory suggests that life on the Earth originated from microorganisms or chemical precursors of life present in outer space and able to initiate life on reaching a suitable environment. Chandra Wickramansinghe, an astronomer and astrobiologist, had this to say: the emergence of life from a primordial soup on the Earth is merely an article of faith that scientists are finding difficult to shed. There is no experimental evidence to support this at the present time. Indeed, all attempts to create life from non-life, starting from Pasteur, have been unsuccessful. Microbiologist Michael Denton adds this: the complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. Physicist Hubert Yockey had a telling admission. Quote, the belief that life on Earth arose spontaneously from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith in strict reductionism and is based entirely on ideology. Spontaneous generation of life from non-living materials has become a dogmatic just so story. Why do these just so stories exist? Because there is a prior commitment to a particular world view. Yes, even scientists have philosophical presuppositions that can affect how they interpret scientific data. I know we've seen a few stark admissions already, but this is one of the most shocking of them all. Richard Lewontin, a Darwinist from Harvard University, admits the blind faith acceptance of just so stories. He says this: our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but, on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. As an aside, materialism is the view that all that exists is the material world. There is nothing immaterial or supernatural to speak of. I just wanted to clarify that since it was mentioned in the quote a couple times, but this is obviously a telling admission. So, you've been blasted by a bunch of information today. Now let's try and kind of bring it all home. The two things we need to take away and think about are these. Information and complexity have been present in life from the very start. These are present in life's simplest forms. If science is a search for causes, and you were to point to the most reasonable explanation of what the cause behind these two realities is, what would that cause be? What would be the cause of this vast amount of information found in all of life? Information that communicates a message. What would be the cause of the complexity found in life? This would be similar to our question of fine-tuning from the previous episode. Instead, this fine-tuning is the fine-tuning of biological life and not our universe. Irreducibly complex systems that have been assembled and structured in a precise way that allow living organisms to perform particular functions. And if anything was missing from these systems, then life itself could be impossible. You have to come to a conclusion for yourself. Could information have come from a non-intelligent source? Could the simplest of life forms spontaneously arrange themselves into these complex systems? Or does information point us to some sort of intelligence? Is the complexity found in life the byproduct of a designer who structured living systems in the way that they are or the way that they should be? I don't think I have enough faith to believe that information can come from non-information. And I don't think I have enough faith to believe that complex living organisms can spontaneously generate themselves. I think there's just too much of a leap there. I believe that it is a reasonable position to hold that these realities came from an intelligent and very powerful source. I do believe that these realities give us good reason to believe that God exists. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions for me, thoughts or comments, even topics you might want me to discuss in a future episode, please send an email to ryanholmespodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit ryanholmespodcast.locals.com to join our community. I appreciate any support. And if you're on the YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and ultimately please share this podcast and let's encourage others to think about their faith and live it out. See you next week.